What's the name of your business?
Smart Security.
Okay. And what do you do? What does your business do?
We teach concealed carry, handgun fundamentals, self-defense. We sell firearms and accessories.
Okay, cool. And have you seen changes recently regarding like the demand for your products?
Yeah, it's been way up. Yeah, the general public's nervous right now. They don't want to lose their Second Amendment right to own a firearm.
Okay.
So you can really tell.
And do you have any numbers as far as like things that have gone up as far as what you're selling?
Well, the demand has gone up, ammo's gone up, but what's really gone up is the number of people taking carry classes, concealed carry classes. That's probably in the last couple of months probably doubled. So it's really going up. And there's no real demographic. It's all over the board as far as what demographics take in the class. So I think everybody's nervous about that.
Cool. So do you think that the general public has a reason to be worried about this stuff?
Well, I mean, they're worried about the government eroding their Second Amendment right, and your right to own and bear arms is obviously a constitutional right. It's really important to them. It's been known, and it's a proven fact that the more gun owners you have, or the more people with concealed carry in a state, that violent crime in those states drops. It's a factual thing. It's a non-bias. You can check the FBI statistics. You can check any non-biased statistic, and it shows you that the more gun owners you have, or the more people with carry permits in that state, violent crime has dropped. Since the more they increase, the more violent crime drops. So.
What would you say to somebody like Piers Morgan, for example, that says, well, look at the crime in Europe, the gun crime, it's so much lower than in the U.S., so
right.
Obviously we should copy what they're doing over there.
Right. Well, that's a factual statement. The gun deaths have dropped in Europe. But if you look at the whole picture, violent crime and deaths by other than firearms has tripled. So it hasn't done anything to stop violent crime. Just like we say, the criminal's the weapon, the firearm's just a tool. And if somebody's going to do a bad thing, they're going to do a bad thing. So it is correct, though, that gun crimes have went down, but violent crime has tripled. So it didn't have the effect they wanted it to have. And the same thing's happening in Australia and Canada. They have the same laws going on as England, and the same thing's happening. Violent crime is still rising, it's not dropping. In the United States, in states that have shell issue, and states that have the stand the ground law, in those states, since they've had shell issue and the stand the ground laws, violent crime has dropped in those states by a real noticeable amount. Right now in Minnesota, we probably have like 1 in 38 carrying a firearm, and it's not wild, wild west. It's not, in fact, violent crime has been dropping in our state. So one of the states that'll be a good telltale sign will be Wisconsin. In the last year, Wisconsin has issued more than 100,000 permits to carry. I think that'll be a big telltale sign when they see how much crime has dropped in 2012 because of that. I think that'll be huge.
So is that a lot more than like what have they had in the past?
They just got carry last November. So they just got it, and in the first 9 months, they issued over 100,000 permits in the first 9 months. So I think you'll see a big drop in crime in Wisconsin just from that. I mean, it's a basic, criminals don't want to, they're looking for the easy dollar, they're looking for the easy person, and if they don't know if you're armed or not, they're not going to rob you. And that's the key there. So it affects crime overall, even if not the whole state is carrying a firearm, it's hard for them to tell who's carrying and who's not carrying. And that's a good thing, because we can't tell who the bad guys are most of the time either. So it's nice to keep them guessing.
Great. So what would you say about like the big thing that everybody's talking about now is that we need to ban assault weapons, and that was one of the executive orders announced today. Do you think that's a good idea?
I think if you start eroding a right, constitutional right, that's where things start. You can lose other rights. If you look at the statistics, AR-15s, they might have been using a few of the mass shootings, but overall, they're not using very many crimes. So they're not gonna see a big difference. They can ban the 10-round, they can make 10-round magazines, ban the high caps. When you're talking about soft targets like schools and places that don't have armed guards, does it matter how long it takes you to reload if nobody's shooting back at you? It doesn't. So it's not gonna make I don't think it's make any difference. You're not going to see a tangible number of crime dropping because of these laws that he's coming out with. The thing that's most common in almost every one of these shootings is the person doing the shooting has some sort of mental illness. And it was a known fact. And somehow they slipped through the cracks. And that's the biggest thing we need to concentrate on is making gun owners responsible for their firearms. So if you have somebody in your family that's not, mentally stable, or somebody that, is not acting their age, you need to lock up your firearms. It's your responsibility. So if those two things happen, fix mental illness or make sure we commit the people who need to be committed, and gun owners just making sure that they keep their guns secure, it'll make a big difference.
Okay. So obviously this is a big issue now after the last mass shooting. So do you think that the country needs to make laws or changes, or what would you say is the best thing to do to go forward from here?
The 3 states with the most gun laws in the United States, California, Illinois, and New York. What are the 3 states with the highest crime rates and the highest murder rates? California, Illinois, New York. That's a telltale sign right there. They've created more laws. Now, I didn't see all, because this is just happening, what he's going to do about. I think education is a way to go. If you educate children, and because a gun's not a bad thing, if it sits by itself, it can't hurt anybody. So I think education is important. You need to educate, not legislate. And that's proven in those 3 states, California and Illinois and New York. You can legislate all you want, it doesn't change anything. But if you educate children and parent children, a lot of these games are violent games. I think it desensitizes a lot of kids. I think that happens too. A lot of the numbers you see in a lot of these states, though, like California and Illinois, New York, majority of the deaths, gun-related deaths, are criminals. They're gangbangers. They have some sort of record. And that's something that's not really published in the numbers, and that's important to know that. The average citizen isn't the person that's out shooting somebody. It's usually a criminal or somebody with mental illness.
What would you say to people that say that like these is it AR-15s?
AR-15s,
And just having these a lot of rounds and stuff like that is not necessary, for hunting or whatever. What is the reason for those guns? And why do we want to why do we want to keep them legal?
When you talk about an AR-15 is just a semi-automatic rifle. When you look at some like the old bands, it looked like they looked through a magazine and said, oh, this looks mean and this doesn't look mean. There wasn't a whole lot of difference. If one had a pistol grip, it can be exactly the same as the other one, but they didn't like the one with the pistol grip. So they made that illegal to own. They're just another semi-automatic rifle. They might have a couple changes here and there, but they all function the same. We haven't been able to have fully autos in the United States, a regular civilian, since 1934. So it's not like the machine guns are the issue. So I think they just put that label, that AR label, because they think it stands for assault rifle. It stands for Armalite rifle. It doesn't stand for AR. So I don't know if the industry needs to change the title to make it a little easier on people, the non-gun people. I don't know.
What would you say to people that that say, well, right-wingers are freaking out about the Second Amendment, and we're always going to be free in America, and we shouldn't be worried about worrying about it, and talking about how back in the day, the founders would have never known the kind of weapons that we have now and stuff like that. Why is it important for people to be overly cautious about keeping the Second Amendment?
Well, just like we said, the Constitution, when you look at all the amendments, the first, the third, the fourth, the fifth, if you skip the second, they're all personal amendments. They apply to that one person. Why do people think that the second that our founding fathers weren't smart enough or bright enough to make sure that all the amendments apply to that person? How do you ensure the First Amendment? How do you ensure freedom of speech? Well, because if you're an armed person or you have that capability of defending that right, and you might have to. I'm retired Navy. I was in the Navy for 21 years. I traveled to many countries that didn't have that right. And they got to say what the government told them to say. There was censorship abound. It was everywhere. And we don't have that in the United States. The problem with the United States is these people have stayed in the United States their whole lives, and they're used to having that freedom of speech and freedom of choice and freedom of religion, and they haven't been to these other countries that don't have that. So they can't really appreciate what they have because they've never had a chance, never seen it if you didn't have it. And I think that's the biggest deal. They've never, you know, we talk about the greatest generation, the World War II generation, and they've seen the Depression, and they've seen being poor, and they know what it's like. And I think that's important, that kind of history, or that kind of, to pay attention to the whole world, not just the United States. And if you see the whole world, how crime is, how violence is, how these people are treated, you'll really appreciate, you know, your Constitution and what you get in the United States.
Do you think that the U.S. could ever get to a point where we have a tyrant or somebody that tries to take too much control, where? Well,
I mean, one of the quotes that President Obama said, and I'm quoting him, he said, just because you have a constitutional right doesn't mean the states can't constrain it. And yes, it does mean they can't constrain it. That's why it's a constitutional right. It's not supposed to be touched. So I think you need to pay attention to that, because a lot of people that get in the power, they don't want, I mean, New York, for example, you can order any kind of food you want in New York except a supersized soda, because we're not responsible enough to make decisions for ourselves if we want a supersized soda or not. I mean, stuff like that, it sounds really trivial, but that's how it starts. You start eroding your rights, and that's how it goes. I mean, what if they start eroding the Second Amendment? What's next? So I think it's important that they're not touched. That's why they've been in the Constitution for so long, and they haven't been touched.
All right. Anything else?
No, I just think that as long as people are responsible gun owners and be neighborly, and if you see somebody that has an issue, mental illness or some kind of problem, that you report it to the people who can take care of it. So that, because everything they have in common is every time we hear about this shooting or that shooting, and the news interviews somebody, some people aren't surprised that, you know, this kid did this or that person did that. Well, if they already knew that person was capable of doing that, why didn't they tell somebody? And you need to be proactive. It's funny how people will break out their cell phone and video something and put it on YouTube, but they won't stop and help somebody. And that's where our society's going, and that's not a good thing. I think you need to be more neighborly and help out. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? A professional can say that they don't need help. Well, in these cases, like in the shooting in Connecticut, a lot of people said they weren't surprised. Well, why didn't those people tell somebody? So I think that's important to do that.